Hi everyone, so I'm going to do a tutorial today on how to watercolor paint this dog named Oscar. I should note first that there are definitely better watercolor artists out there. I'm very new to the medium. I've had 3 months off of work, and so I just wanted to try learning watercolor. But if you're interested in learning a technique and a style that works for me, then feel free to watch. So the first thing I usually do is I take the reference image and duplicate it twice. And with the first one, I open it up and crank the saturation. I found this helps bring out some of the colors that are hiding and colors that you want to identify and notice, especially while doing a watercolor. Then I take the second image, duplicated, and crank the saturation all the way down. And the reason I do this is so that I can see just value within the reference image. Then I open up both images and display them on my desktop for reference so I can check value and color during the painting. I got a piece of watercolor paper here that roughly matches the aspect ratio of the reference image, and I taped off some borders just to help me stay within a comfortable boundary. And here you can see me starting to sketch in the face with a hard pencil very lightly, and what you'll notice is I immediately see I proportioned it all wrong. And so I erased and started over, and I took a better approach, which is to block in really the silhouette and some of the large geometry and shapes before going in and adding detail within the form. This helps you map out and make sure that the whole form is going to fit within your allotted area. The key here is to really just focus on large planes and large shapes and geometry, and don't look necessarily at the detail in the reference image yet. You want to look at where are the changes in lighting, whether it be in lighting color or in lighting intensity. Where are the planes that are the most highlighted and where are the planes that are the most in shadow, and sketch those out as large geometrical shapes on top of the form. That's going to help you map out exactly where you want to put the watercolor. This is going to be a long format video. I always appreciate when I'm watching and learning watercolor videos online and other art videos. I like the long form videos that don't skip huge portions of the process. I like to see and be able to scroll back and forth through the video and see in detail how that artist does their process. So I'm going to try and format this video in the same manner. So when you're laying down your first layer of just water, you want to think about where you want color that you apply and pigment to flow. And so you want to be careful. The only thing you really need to be careful with on this layer is not adding water to the bright white highlight. So everything else is pretty much fair game as long as it's within the lines. And it's okay to be a little sloppy with it because light bleeds and gradiates, and so should your watercolor. The other point I want to be careful with is right on the edge of the fur on this right leg, right at this edge. There's a pretty bright highlight, so I'm going to try and back off of that with the color or with the water so we don't get too much color to bleed into there. And the same thing happens around the light wispy fur around the side of his head. This all has quite a bit of shadow here, so you can layer it on. And I'm avoiding the bridge of his nose. There's just a tiny bright white highlight on the tip of his nose. The rest is sort of a purple blue color. And the edge of his ears also have a highlight. And if you do manage to hit a highlight spot with water, you can dissuade the color from flowing to it by dabbing it with a paper towel. And you can bleed outside the lines a little bit on the pause because we know there's going to be shadow there, pretty dark shadow, and so you kind of want the color to bleed a little bit into the ground plane. I think I'm going to start with this yellow-green in his chest area. Get a little bit of yellow, tiny bit of green. What kind of green? Maybe a little bit of blue. In general, you want to keep the first wash layer light as possible. At least that's my understanding. Mixing up a bit of green because I see this yellow-green, especially down here in the leg, a bit up here into his beard. I see this yellow-orange in his paw. Still has a bit of green in some places. It gets slightly more blue, just a bit. As it gets down here in this shadow edge. Even a little bit more blue, I think. And the color you put on now, since the paper's so wet, it's going to spread out quite a bit, so just be aware of that. There's a lot of reflected blue light on his chin. And then yellow-green along his brow. And also the saturation of all the colors definitely starts to lighten and lessen when the paper dries. And so everything looks a little bit extreme right now, but it'll lessen over time. Definitely some blue right there and a little shadow. Worms we start to get are on his hind leg. It's weird because you see a white dog and you think, how do I draw white? But really, white is a reflection of the lighting environment and the colors in the environment and the temperature of the light. So it can be kind of counterintuitive and look wacko when you're first applying color, but I think, at least what I've seen, that tends to work out. I feel like a little bit too much value has pooled up near his eyebrow, so I'm drying the brush, and you can lift a little bit of value and color out where you don't want it. Trying to spread a little bit of this cool blue shadow into the places that I want it. keep a very light yellow for any of the work up here where we know he's getting a lot of sunlight. And that orange we talked about in the ears. Some blue-green in the shadow core of the ears. Hooks right up to the pink in his ears. Actually warms up quite a bit as it gets up into this shadow. So I added a little bit of red. That comes down to about there. I can't actually see this paw in the photo, so I'm just gonna reference the other paws and make some assumptions. Most of these surfaces turn blue-green as they get towards the disappearing edge, so. And I'm looking right now at the monochromatic image and just looking for where there's a lot more value, which is in the shadow areas. You don't need to add that all right now because you can add that in subsequent layers, but it helps a bit. And try and lift a little bit of value away from his floof pants back here. Putting a little bit of cool shadow around his feet. And his nose is very much dark purple, dark purple, to the point of being black. I'm gonna mix some red and blue and try and get a very dark purple. We don't have to go full value on it yet, but just to get it started. And decidedly more blue down into his little mustache below his nose. So I'm gonna let this first layer dry and then take another look. I do want to lift this puddle out of here. To lift up that color, you just dampen it with clear water, and then you can dab it up. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry. One other thing I want to do before it dries and we move on to the next layer is I'm not really going to draw any environment for this, but I want to put a little ground plane shadow just to ground the whole form and make it feel a little bit more believable. And so since this layer's dried a little bit, I don't have to worry about too much bleeding, but I can put in a little bit of clear water near the paws, and you can kind of decide what color you want the shadow to be, whatever you would want. But right now I feel like there's a lot of yellow green in this, and so I kind of want to warm up the shadow a little bit just to balance the composition and make it feel more colorful and dynamic. So I'm going to do kind of a little bit purpler shadow and mix up very light watery pigment for the shadow for now, because we can always add later. Okay, always as it's drying, I'm looking at the reference photo and seeing areas that need touch-ups. One in particular would be, I'm looking at the value and trying to match the color here. It looks like there's a bit of shadow that borders his rib cage on his leg, just on the far side of that highlight, and wraps around and defines some of his body shape and muscle tone, and that's kind of important for just describing the form well. And so I'm going to try and block that in while there's still a little bit of flow left in the paper. We get some pretty dark green blue values right here at this disappearing edge. What I've read online, and I struggle to do a lot, my paintings end up looking really blotchy and frenetic and busy and lots of little pools and islands of color. I've read it helps in watercolor to try and connect all the forms that you can into one shape, because it just sort of simplifies and makes it less busy, in my opinion. So that's something I'm practicing, not with too much success yet. That's a little too much value, so I'm gonna just dab some of it off. Yeah, that looks better. And this is a very interesting green reflection right here on his brow that I think is reflecting some of the environment, which is why it's so green, some of the plants. I would like to capture that, because that hard shadow here in a M shape really defines the form of Oscar's face here. Wraps under his eye a bit, and his jowl is very yellow. Quite a bit of yellow there. One thing I'm seeing in the photo here, and it's really subtle, is I'm trying to figure out how to define his outer edge without adding value to it. And you see in the photo there's actually this sort of halo of very, very light blue light that just illuminates the tips of his hair. And so I'm gonna try and really subtly allude to that. Just around the border, just to capture that sort of halo of light that we see. And I haven't tried anything like this before, so you're gonna see me experiment in real time here. White fur is turning out to be fairly difficult to capture, so let me know if you have ideas. This is like a mostly dry brush, so it's not laying down a puddle for me. I'm just using the corner in the areas where I really see the pronounced halo effect. Definitely too much there. So I'm gonna dab the shit out of that. Don't love that it kind of flattened the whole image, but I'm gonna be able to come back over that with a little bit of gouache maybe, so you don't see too much of it. Let's see if I can lift some of it. Another way I could do this, I think, would be do a background behind him, and define the edge of him and his fur by means of omission. But I think these dog portraits I've been doing, I'm trying to do them on just a white background, so I don't want to get too heavy into a background. So we'll see. So since I washed away some of the detail with that first layer, I want to be able to see my plan for the eyes again. So I'm going to come back in with some light pencil and some other details here. That should give me a good mapping for where to place the eyes. So I think I'll start with the eyes, which are sort of that same very deep purple that the eyes are basically black, but I think the source color is that deep purple. So I'm going to try and mix the blackest purple that I can. Went a little overboard on the left eye. It's a little sloppy, but again, this is something I can fix with pencil and white pencil and gouache on the final pencil layer. So I'm going to leave that for now. Move on to some more dark values. Right now you can see in this wash layer the furthest away leg sort of blended with the bottom side of his rib cage, and in the image there's a very distinct foreground and background there where the chest is a lighter value. So I'm going to darken this up significantly. Let's see what color are we using here. There's some fur hanging down right here, which is why I'm adding those little strands. And I'm paying attention to the direction of all the fur while I'm applying this, since we're sort of drawing the fur by omission here. And as I drag this pigment out, it will get a little bit lighter, which is intentional because there's a little bit more reflected light on the leg as it gets closer to the ground. So that's good. I'll pretend like I did it on purpose or planned it. Adding just a tad of blue in here. Just to reference the deep shadow in this area. And then blend it out. And the next dark value, next darkest I would say, is the right in the arch of his two front legs on his chest. And I think that's sort of yellow, green, blue. Okay, so we have some deep dark red, sort of warm red in the depths of the ears here that we need to punch up a bit. So I'm gonna lay in some value there. And again, I'm looking at the fur and trying to capture the direction of its flow. You're not drawing individual hairs, but you're capturing the gesture of the hairs. Just tiny bit of lighter red right on his left lip there. Seeing the tiniest bit of red over here. Yeah. And in his outskirts over here. We still need to punch up this green in his brow a little bit. Maybe a little more blue. So you can see what happened here in the areas I intended to be very dark value is the too much water sort of pushed all the pigment to the edges, and now this almost reads as it's pulling forward in space like a highlight, and so I need to come back over this once it's completely dry and repunch those dark areas just so they're not popping off the page so much. When I shut off the camera, I also came in and did a little bit of touch up in the ears and added a little bit of orange around the eyes, which you can see in the photo upon closer look. So I'm gonna go ahead and punch these highlights there. Yeah, not quite dry yet. I'm just touching up the outer edge really lightly with the pencil because I don't like how it's disappearing into the page. We'll see how this works. He's got the really fluffy hair that I think is important to capture. Then you come through and punch it up with a white pencil and maybe some white gouache on top for highlights. Green of his face a little bit here. So I'm going to do his whisker with white pencil, see if it reads through. Not super well. Let me try a different one. White gouache it is. Just barely indicating the nostrils there with the white pencil. This is reflected light right on the bottom of his chin that you can see kind of glowing. And I chased this value a little too far up, so I'm going to chase it back and round out his muzzle again. Okay, I think that about wraps Oscar up. So we'll sign him and I'll be done. Hard to write that small. So I finished up Oscar and I hung him up on the wall, and I immediately saw a very glaring proportional issue with his eyes and muzzle. His eyes are just far too wide spread apart in my painting, and his muzzle's a little too wide as well. And the effect of that is sort of making him look like a puppy version of what he should actually look like. So minor proportional issue, but really the intent of this study was to challenge myself to paint white fur, and I think I was relatively successful in doing that. So overall, I'm very happy. Thanks for watching, and by all means, comment and let me know if you have any ideas how I could improve, or if you have any comments in general.